I've been informed that I absolutely must read some of my original work for you guys. Um, Smilodon was excessively emphatic about this. Um, there were too many yeses to even count. Um, yeah, I'm gonna read you a thing that I did, the beginning of a thing that I did. Um, and it doesn't have a title. Uh, all we know for sure is that it was based on a dream I had. Um, so I'm just gonna start reading, and I guess you'll see. Oh, and before we get started, I know the name of the main character is evocative of many things. Please try to distance yourself from them, just for my sake. I wrote this before I ever got into Welcome to Night Vale. I just want you to know that. Daniel had never liked the eagle on the hill. The statue loomed above the rest of the city, its majestic stone head stretching hundreds of stories into the sky, taller than the tallest skyscraper. The steel and glass minarets of the Academy of Science would barely have tickled its chin. The somber brown stone of the eagle shone like mahogany in the orange light of sunset, and the great green jewel in its chest sparkled magnificently, as did the green jewels in its eyes. Once the sun set, the statue would go black, blacker than the night, and the jewels would gleam in the spilled light from the city streets. Daniel's window faced the hill, and in the night he would wake to find the eagle peering in his window, its great head twisted almost all the way backwards, its eyes gleaming past the wide swoop of its outstretched wings, lit from beneath with the fluorescent fires of the city. He stood on his doorstep, looking over his shoulder at the eagle. For the moment its head was turned forward, gazing imperiously over the downtown area. It always took this attitude as sundown approached, staring away at nothing as though the affairs of the city people were too far below it to even notice. A spark of sunlight came jutting from the jewel in its chest and struck Daniel in the eye, forcing him to look away and squeeze his eyes shut. When he looked back a moment later, the eagle's head had turned, ever so slightly, to face the north. Daniel shook his head and went inside, taking comfort when he heard the door auto-lock behind him. On cue, his holographic butler appeared, standing at attention in the kitchen doorway. "Good afternoon, sir," it said in its eerily human voice. "Go away," Daniel retorted, walking right through the butler. "I am to remind you, sir, that you have an appointment with Miss Hawkins this evening," the butler continued, flickering to face him. This was another thing Daniel disliked about the butler. It never actually turned, just adjusted its image in flickers so that it was always facing him. Daniel, in the midst of gently pushing his groceries into the cradling green cooling gel of his 2-foot-deep refrigerator, looked up sharply, mouth agape. "Oh, shit," he said, and began stuffing cans and jars into the gel as fast as he could. "What time was that supposed to be?" "7:30, sir," the butler replied crisply. "I can take care of the rest of those if you would like." A skeletal robotic arm, hanging from a clever rail system on the ceiling, smoothly glided over to Daniel. He swatted it away like a pesky insect. "I've told you not to touch my stuff," he snapped. "How long do I have?" "Approximately 9 minutes, sir," the butler answered. The robot arm gently folded itself up and nestled against its rail. "At this time, I would recommend the rails rather than the pavements." "Pavements," Daniel spat. "They're called sidewalks, you Brit-made piece of crap. And I hate the rails. I'll run there." "Even at your top speed, sir, you will not make it on time." Daniel stormed back through the butler, grabbing his keys off the counter where he had dropped them. Behind him, the robotic arm silently unfolded and began picking up his green polyester grocery bags, neatly folding them and stowing them under the sink. "Then I'll be late. I hate the rails!" He flung open the door and danced down the few steps to the sidewalk. There was no asphalt, only wide concrete walkways between the rows of houses. Beneath the city, however, was level upon level of high-speed rails, weaving a thick cobweb of steel deep below Daniel's pounding feet. At the top layer was the intercity trains, faster than all the rest and placed closest to the surface because of the increased risk of accident. Outside the city limits, the rails emerged from underground and skimmed across the Earth's surface like glittering steel rivers. Beneath that were 3 levels of commuter trains that could get anyone anywhere in the city inside of 10 minutes. Daniel had little time for the rails, their dark tunnels leaving him feeling trapped and claustrophobic. On the surface, he raced past row after row of white, round-cornered houses. They were not all the same, but they were very similar. Government-provided housing had every right to be unspectacular, considering how cheap it was. As his breath began to come shorter, he emerged from the government subdivision and into the city proper, where the plastic walls of the houses had been skillfully crafted to look like all sorts of different materials. Terracotta had been the prevailing trend when the city had been built, so most of the houses had green tiled roofs, reminiscent of ones archaeologists had dug up from ancient China. He took a corner, narrowly avoiding a woman with a stroller, and dashed onward. To his left, the city's clock tower began to chime, letting out a cheerful tune that signaled the half-hour. It, too, was sculpted to look like brick and terracotta, and the four faces of the clock were emblazoned with Roman numerals. At night, the faces would turn backwards and tilt up, and the clock would project the time into the night sky with a clever series of lenses and lights inside the tower. Even as Daniel ran past, he could hear the machinery beginning to hum as the last rays of sunlight were dimming on the top of the tower. Finally, just as the clock's cheerful tune came to a close, Daniel jogged to a stop just in front of a wide, limestone-paved courtyard. At the center of the court there were several fountains, spraying fans of water into the warm evening air. There were also thin strips of verdant grass cross-cutting the court, dividing it into a variety of interesting geometrical patterns. And, leaning against one of the fountains, checking her wristwatch, was Minami Hawkins. Daniel, already short of breath, felt his throat catch. Minami was one of that privileged class who had more money than they knew what to do with. Her jet-black hair was tinged with gold and cascaded down her back in graceful waves. Her face was like a doll's, entirely unblemished, although both of her arms were covered wrist to shoulder in colorful tattoos, some of which lit up with embedded fiber-optic cables at the touch of a concealed button. She was wearing a form-fitting black dress that was little more than a tube of fabric, but it was a tube that fit her extremely well, showing off her advert-perfect body. The shoes she had chosen were golden pumps, which buckled and strapped all the way up to her knees. As Daniel arrived, she looked up. "You're late," she said. "I'm sorry," he replied, trying not to be distracted by the fact that she was wearing golden mascara around her almond-shaped eyes. "I got held up." She raised one perfect eyebrow. "You forgot," she corrected. Daniel hung his head. "I forgot," he agreed. In his tennis shoes, khakis, and understated blue polo, it was fairly obvious that Daniel was not on the same wavelength as Minami, at least in terms of fashion. To add to that, he was now shining with a thin layer of sweat from his run, and darker blue patches were appearing on his polo. "Whatever," Minami said, rolling her eyes. "I figured you'd pull something like this. It doesn't matter, they don't start charging until 9 anyway. Come on, they won't let you in like that. We're going shopping." "Minami," Daniel began, but she glared at him. Minami's eyes were possibly the only part of her no one had altered, at least according to her. Daniel personally thought that that particular shade of blue didn't occur in nature, especially not in a first-gen American, but he wasn't willing to call her out on it. "Don't argue," she said, her voice strangely conspiratorial, her Cupid's bow lips scarcely moving. "Play along." She took his elbow and led him to the nearest sidewalk, where they moved along at a leisurely stroll. "So, what's the name of this place again?" Daniel inquired, after the silence had stretched too long. "The Eagle," Minami replied. "It's kind of exclusive, I'm not surprised you haven't heard of it." "Weird name for a club, isn't it?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "It's not just a club. It's also a bar, cyber cafe, and concert venue." "Oh," said Daniel. "And which of these are we using it for?" "What do you think?" Minami asked, gesturing to her getup. "Oh," said Daniel. "I guess I'm underdressed then." "I guess you are." She tossed her head imperiously, fixing her gaze straight ahead. "I'm sorry I forgot," he said, taking her hand in his own. "Work was chaos today." "Oh?" As they walked past one of the huge steel and glass skyscrapers of the Academy of Sciences, Minami took a corner unexpectedly, forcing Daniel to stumble awkwardly after her. Yeah, there's a new bug in the West system that's making it rain every Tuesday. And I mean really pour all day. The canals can't keep up with it, so they've had to shut down the rails because it's too dangerous. People are upset about it, as you can imagine. They had me down in the tangle all day trying to find the bug." "And did you find it?" Daniel shook his head. No, I had to clock out before I found anything. He walked in silence for a moment before asking, What about you? What have you been up to all day? Another flick of the head, sending her hair shimmering in the bright blue light of the street lamps that were just beginning to flick on. Raksha told me about some new falafel place on New Delaware Street. Turns out it was just processor stuff, just add water kind of thing. Too bad. Well, it wasn't a total waste, Minami continued. The place is right across the street is a big cyborg hangout. You wouldn't believe the number of tin cans in there. I really wish you wouldn't call them that, Daniel protested, squeezing Minami's hand. He felt something go click under the pressure, and a network of lights shone out from under her skin, stylized swirls of color mimicking ocean waves. Great, now I have to do the other one, she grumbled, clenching her other hand into a fist. With a matching click, more fiber optics of a similar design went on in her other arm. Minami, you know I don't like that term. It's actually really offensive to people with tech, Daniel continued. And with everything you've had done, you're probably at least a third circuitry yourself. Her jaw clenched and she took her hand out of his, her pace increasing slightly. I might have had a lot of work done, Daniel, but I'm no tin can. Besides, it's not having tech I object to, it's the damn mentality. They think they're so much better than the rest of us just because they have a metal arm or some shit. At least I don't have to plug into a battery pack every night. Daniel sighed. Minami's implants ran on bioelectrics. They took chemical energy from her body and converted it into electrical energy. It never had to be recharged and had the added benefit of keeping her very slim. He bit his tongue to keep from pointing out that most small robotic implants, fingers, toes, eyes, also ran on bioelectrics. Instead, he contented himself with saying, So what was going on at this cyborg hangout? Oh, the usual, Minami sighed. There was a little bit of a scuffle when someone plugged into somebody else's socket. Daniel raised an eyebrow. A little bit of a scuffle? Yeah, she answered, and grinned like a maniac. Some guy got his arm torn off. She looked over at Daniel's horrified expression. The metal one, she clarified. Duh. Oh, said Daniel. Right, of course. Otherwise it would have been a little more than a little bit of a scuffle. And a lot more interesting. She stopped suddenly, leaving Daniel flailing to keep from running into her. This should do. Before them was a monster of a building, taking up a full city block and rising 6 stories into the sky. Blazing in neon lights from signs on its roof were the words, Herringer, covered, as per regulation, by a dark metal canopy to prevent light pollution. Daniel scurried after Minami through the automatic glass doors, which slid smoothly shut behind him. How long have I been reading for? Okay, I can do a little bit more. Inside Herringer, it was cool and smelled of cleaning fluid. The atrium into which they had walked contained a fountain surrounded by a small indoor garden, complete with small, colorful songbirds that were just quieting down for the night. No telling if they were real or just a good imitation. 6 floors of open walkways looked out onto the atrium, the shop fronts behind them lit up brightly. Because Daniel had stopped to stare, Minami took him by the wrist and dragged him over to one of the 4 cylindrical glass elevators arrayed around the open space. Stop staring, Daniel, you look like an idiot, she admonished as the elevator door rotated around to close them in. She pressed the button for floor 5, showing off sparkling gold nail polish. The elevator slid smoothly upward, making the atrium drop away disconcertingly beneath their feet. Sorry, he said. I've never been here before. It's generally a little beyond my price range. Minami eyed him critically. It's a mall, she said flatly. How is that beyond your price range? You have a job, don't you? You don't even have to pay rent. Daniel shrugged as the elevator slowed smoothly to a halt. With a gentle ding, the door slid back, and Daniel found himself pulled out into the mall again. Yeah, and the government knows that. I don't get paid very much. Fine, I guess I can cover you, Minami said, rolling her eyes. It was my idea anyway. You don't have to, Daniel objected. I can splurge every once in a while. No, it's my treat. Suddenly she smiled at him, an odd but not unwelcome expression. It'll be worth it to get to play dress-up with you. Daniel sighed. Why does it seem like all I ever do is get dragged around by you? He asked, resignedly letting her tow him along. Because that is all you do, she replied. In here, we only have an hour. Minami pulled him into a small store with a few items of clothing on display. She walked right up to the counter, leaned her elbows on it, and said to the cashier, "Everything you've got in black and gold. For him." She jerked her head at Daniel. "I'll see what I can do," the young woman replied, and ducked into a back room. "What about all the stuff out here?" Daniel asked, indicating the racks and shelves. Minami scoffed. "Cheap stuff. People have probably been touching it all day." "How dare they?" Daniel said flatly. "Listen, Minami, it's not that I don't appreciate the attention, but seriously, this seems like a lot of hassle." "It's worth it," she said. "Trust me." Just then, the woman came out of the back, and Daniel spent the next 20 minutes trying on clothes, being looked over by Minami, and then sent back into the changing room. In the end, she picked out a black shirt with gold trim and a pair of black dress pants. She paid for them without letting Daniel see the price, then took him by the hand and dragged him away. "That wasn't so painful, was it?" she asked as they got back into the elevator. "We'll be early, even." "Early?" Daniel said. "Are we meeting someone?" Minami looked at him sharply. "No, of course not. Unless you invited anyone, which I doubt since you forgot about it." "I said I was sorry." She waved a hand dismissively. "Forget about it. You seem to be good at that. Anyway, no, we're not meeting anyone, seeing as this is supposed to be a date." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You can be a real bitch sometimes, you know that?" he said, and winced, wondering how the words had managed to get as far as his mouth. Minami looked over at him, amused. "I know that," she said. "I do it on purpose to see how far I can push you." Suddenly she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. "And I'm sorry. You'll have fun tonight, I promise. Cross my heart." Daniel sighed, feeling heat rise under his collar. "Okay, fine," he mumbled, looking at the floor. "So we'll get there early." Okay, it's been several minutes, and now it's raining outside, apparently. I called down the rain. So if you guys want to hear more of that story, I will very happily read more of it. It's not fully written, but there is kind of a lot of it. If you want to hear some of my other stories, I can do that too. I have several. There's Victorian Lovecraftian horror. There's one about a self-aware anime main character who doesn't want to be a main character. If you've seen the Tumblr post to that effect about the person who's born with pink hair, and yeah. So I'm writing a story about that. There's one that's realistic fiction with fantasy elements included in it. And there's one that's just like straight up fantasy. And those two are finished, but are kind of old. So they're not fantastic. But I would be willing to read any of those if you guys want me to, because I'm bored and have no life. So thanks for watching, for tuning in, for listening. Thanks for your support and your encouragement. And I guess I will see you guys later. So, bye.